see this lovely popcorn, also called acoustic ceiling above me? Well, it's gonna be coming down today because it's 2023. No one wants popcorn ceilings in their house anymore. Now, one thing you should know before taking down any popcorn ceilings in your house is that before 1979, a lot of acoustic ceilings had asbestos in them. So if your house was built in 1979 or before, you should definitely get your acoustic ceilings checked for asbestos. Now, if you haven't watched any of my videos before, my name is Connor Ryan. I'm a photographer, videographer, and I'm getting into acting and modeling too. So that's my full-time thing, but I'm also a real estate investor slash renovator on the side. I've been renovating this whole house that I bought last year. It's a 3-bed, 2-bath, about 1,600 square feet, and I'm about 70% done so far, but I've developed a system to take down these popcorn ceilings, and I want to share it with everyone else because I screwed up a lot in the beginning. I had to go and completely redo the whole master bedroom, which was the first room I did in this house. And it was a big waste of time having to go back and fix all my mistakes I did because I didn't know what I was doing. So before we get down to any removal of the popcorn, let's do the prep work. And the prep work is very important. If there are any light fixtures or ceiling fans in your room, you're gonna need to disconnect them and take them off the ceiling. Same goes for any air conditioning vents. Unscrew them and take them out of the ceiling. You should also turn off the circuit to the light fixtures because we will be spraying water in the room. Now it's time to cover the walls so you don't get this wet popcorn material all over your carpet, your floors, your walls of paint. You don't want this stuff to get on it because it's gonna be messy. So in order to cover my walls and floors, I use these plastic drop cloths. See if you can read it. Plastic drop cloths, you get them at Home Depot. I get a 5-pack because that's the cheapest. I don't know if it comes in more, but you're gonna need a lot of them, so get the big pack for sure. Now, since I'm completely redoing this entire room, I'm not gonna cover every wall, but I am gonna cover one with the window on it so I can show you an example of what that looks like. So take your first plastic sheet and you're gonna have to unravel it and shake it out so that it's nice and flat before we try to get it up on that wall. Once you've got it ready, grab a roll of blue painter's tape. You don't need any special kind, just the cheapest option will work for this. Grab a stepladder and let's get these plastic sheets up on the wall. If you will not be repainting the walls in your room that you're taking the popcorn down in, you should definitely try to get that tape up as close to the popcorn as possible because you don't want it on any part of wall that's already painted. Once you've got all your walls covered, it's time to move on to the floor. Putting it down on the floor is pretty straightforward, so just enjoy this background music and my cat invading the workspace. He's a good boy though. So now that you've got the room prepped and ready to start taking popcorn off the ceiling, you're gonna need 2 things. The first one is a pump sprayer, which I got from Home Depot for like 16 bucks. You could also use an airless sprayer, which is more expensive, but it'll spray water on like a hose basically. But I found that unless you're a full-time professional, then getting the $16 pump sprayer is gonna do just fine for you. You just need a way to get the popcorn on the ceiling really freaking wet. So the second thing you're gonna need is a way to actually scrape the popcorn off the ceiling. And to do that, I use a 10-inch putty knife and I tape it to a painting pole. Now the way I tape it is using a very strong tape. Duct tape will work. I use gaff tape, but any kind of strong tape is what you'll use to get the putty knife to stay secured to the pole. Once you have your putty knife ready and your pump sprayer, you're ready to get going. All right, we're gonna make like the Little Mermaid here, and everything's better down where it's wetter. And you want that ceiling to be pretty much as wet as you can get it without soaking through to the drywall. And the way that I found to know where it's at the right level is when the popcorn is dripping a little bit from the ceiling, but not just like sopping, like water getting all over the floor or anything like that. You're gonna soak it really good. You want it to get really damp, and that's gonna make it really easy to scrape off the ceiling and require you to do a lot less sanding at the end of the day. And now we have the piece de resistance, the grand finale, the part you've all been waiting for, scraping the popcorn. If you don't like the video after watching this, then I don't know what to tell you. I guess you just don't enjoy things, because there's nothing more enjoyable than this. That is just so satisfying. Now, I hate to break it to you, but this is the easiest part of the whole job. The hardest is yet to come. You know, we'll let it roll. We'll just enjoy this moment a little bit longer before I speed it up. Now I'm taking a smaller putty knife and scraping out the corners where the ceiling meets the wall. You're gonna find a lot of popcorn residue will get stuck in that corner, and that's gonna affect painting later because it'll make it harder to get those really smooth straight lines where the wall meets the ceiling. As you can see, the ceiling is completely scraped now. There's a couple little imperfections I'm gonna have to fix with some drywall compound, but after that dries, I'm gonna start sanding. But for now, we gotta get all this crap out of here, and that's where the plastic drop cloths come in big time clutch. When you're taking down the plastic, start with the sections on the walls first, and just throw those in the middle, because you're gonna roll up all the plastic on the floor, basically into a big ball. And if you wanna make it easier, you can throw this in a big trash can and take it out to the dumpster, or you can just do what I did, rolled up into a ball and carry it out yourself. Okay, also it is the next day. I waited a little while to let the drywall dry out. It'll make it easier to sand. I also did a couple patches on the ceiling and the walls, so I'm gonna sand all that today. And because of all the sanding that I'm about to be doing, I need to take some precautions. So I'm not trying to get political here, but you should definitely wear a mask whenever you're doing any sanding, because those particles, if they get into your lungs, those can cause a lot of issues, long-term, short-term. It's just gonna hurt. I have asthma, so anything that gets in my lungs will irritate it really bad. And I have my body covered in clothes, head to toe, and I'm gonna be wearing gloves. I just don't want any dust on me, the minimal amount possible. It's also what this lovely Bass Pro Shops hat is for. I got it at the Pyramid here in downtown Memphis. I don't give a crap about it, so it can get dust all over it. And then one more thing I've done is I opened the window in the bedroom and I placed a fan to suck all of the dust, or as much as I can, out and push it out the window. Because you don't want any of this dust lingering around in your house, especially if you live there. I've also turned off the AC, and I'm stuffing a rag up into my AC vent so no particles float up into the vents. All right, so what are you gonna need to sand? Well, first you're gonna need that pole that we used to scrape the ceiling with, and you're gonna need one of these attachments for that pole. I got this at Home Depot, like pretty much everything else I've talked about in this video. It's really cheap, but it gets the job done. Again, I'm not a professional. I don't care if I don't have all of the exact super top line things. And then your sanding paper is going to be this kind, the very long kind, not the short kind you put on a small square. It's gotta be long enough for these pole sanders. That's what it's called, a pole sander. 150 medium grit does just fine. You don't want too rough or too smooth, so 150 is a good middle ground. There you go, now your pole sander is ready to go. One thing that makes this a lot easier is if you extend the pole really long, that way you aren't working as hard to keep this over your shoulders. It'll make it a lot easier on your arms because you're gonna be doing a lot of back and forth movements to get the ceiling looking where you want it to. Also, take anything out of the room that you don't want covered in dust because it's gonna be everywhere. I didn't cover the floors because I'm tearing out this carpet as soon as I sand this room. Now, the sanding itself is pretty straightforward. You just move that pad back and forth until you see a bunch of dust falling from the ceiling, and you're just gonna have to stand back and look to see if you're actually smoothing out the ceiling. Thankfully, I did a pretty good job getting the popcorn off originally. So there's not as much to sand, but if you have ridges and you see lots of these like white spots, those you're definitely gonna have to sand. Where it's more brown, that's just drywall. Alrighty, we've got that ceiling buttery smooth. So now it's time to take out this carpet and vacuum and make sure this place isn't a giant dust heap anymore before we start painting. All right, it's time to do the fun part where it makes the room stop smelling like exposed drywall, painting. So we're gonna start with putting some primer on. You gotta put primer on exposed drywall like this. If you just try to put normal paint, it's not gonna look good. It probably won't even stick on the right way it's supposed to. So get you some primer. I use Kills because you can't even read it anymore. But I use Kills primer. You get it at Home Depot and this stuff kills it every time. It covers up heavy stains. It makes it so easy to paint. It covers up old colors really easily. I love this stuff. I've been using it in the whole house. It hasn't failed me yet. And to do the paint job, I'm gonna be using a roller attached to the paint pole we used to scrape the ceiling, and a brush. This is a 3-inch flat brush, Purdy, also from Sherwin-Williams. I found them to be the best brand of brushes out of all the ones I've tried. I'm gonna use this brush for the corners because you can't get the corners with a rolling brush. You gotta do it with a hand brush. Go ahead and pop open that paint can, and we're gonna pour a lot into our painting tray because we are gonna need a lot of primer to put on this dry, exposed ceiling. Then you're gonna take your paintbrush and make sure that thing is completely loaded up with paint, and that'll make it roll a lot easier. Time to put that primer down. When you're rolling the paint across the ceiling, you wanna go back and forth multiple times over the area to make sure you really get good coverage. If you roll over just once, there's a high chance that you're gonna miss some spots and you'll see it later. So just make sure you get that brush filled with paint, roll over the area multiple times, especially on your first coat, and that's gonna give you a great starting place for the rest of the paint. Here I'm using the brush to paint in those corners that I couldn't get with the roller. If you don't want to get paint on your walls, this is going to be pretty much impossible to do. So you'll probably have to repaint where your wall meets the ceiling after you finish painting the ceiling. But since I am repainting my walls later, I want to get as much primer in those corners as possible to square off the edges really nicely. Now when you're painting the ceiling, you may notice some imperfections based on the angle of your work light or how whatever light is hitting the ceiling. But the primer, once you put 2 coats on, it's gonna dull a lot of those blemishes. And once you put the flat white paint on, it's really gonna be hard to tell those minor imperfections. Now, if you have like big bumps and ridges, you got a problem, you should probably spray those more, scrape them again before you paint over them, because then they're gonna be really hard to get off by that point. That's what I did in my bedroom the first time I took care of the popcorn in there, and I had to completely go back and redo the whole thing months later. So don't waste your time, just go ahead and get all those imperfections out of the way. But if there's some minor ones, if you're gonna be a perfectionist in home renovation, you're never gonna finish your projects, just being honest. So if it's good for the 6-foot rule, as in it looks good from 6 feet away, I think you're fine. Just finished the first coat. Took me a little while because when you scrape off popcorn off the drywall, it's super dry. It's named drywall, I guess. And it takes a lot of paint to really get that good first layer down. But the good news is every layer afterwards is gonna go super quick and be a lot easier. Okay, y'all, that is 2 coats of primer done. I'm gonna let this dry, and it's late and I'm tired. I got a basketball game to watch, so I will finish painting tomorrow on the ceiling, and we're gonna put on the final 2 coats of the actual paint, which is the flat white paint. And we are back 2 days later. We're ready to put on the final 2 coats of our ceiling paint. It is that flat white paint, and it's gonna make the ceiling look super nice, way better than what we had before with that awful, terrible popcorn ceiling. And the paint that's gonna be our final coat on the ceiling is going to be a flat white paint. I use Promar 400, you can see it. I get this paint from Sherwin-Williams. One time they told me it was a contractor grade paint, but I still get it anyway. I don't know if that means they don't give it to everyone, but either way, it just gets you a flat white ceiling color. You can do that with any other kind of paint, but this is what I use. It looks great. Here we are painting on our final coats. Again, make sure you get good coverage by rolling back and forth over the same area multiple times, and we're gonna use our brush to paint in those corners, like with the primer. Also, if you have a work light, just shine it from one corner of the room and stand back and see if there are any shiny spots like you see right here once you're done painting. That means you didn't get full coverage on that area with the flat paint, and that shiny spot is the primer still showing through. The whole ceiling has now been painted. I got the fan blowing to help it dry quicker. Now I'm gonna let the ceiling completely dry and come back in about 2 hours and check it again, because we don't wanna wash off our paint brushes and all that before we make sure we didn't miss any spots on the ceiling. And here's a pro tip: if you're gonna keep your paint brushes around to use later in the day, you don't want them to dry out. So what you do is wrap them in cling wrap, and that way they won't dry out. You can use them again later. Okay guys, we are back a couple hours later and the ceiling is completely dry and it's looking amazing. Way better than what we started with. And I honestly only put one coat on and I think it looks awesome. So I'm not gonna put another one on. And with that, we went from a yellowy, cobweb-filled popcorn ceiling to a modern, flat white ceiling. And I love it. If this helped you out, if you just enjoyed the pure satisfaction of watching popcorn come off the ceiling, give this video a like, subscribe if you want to learn more things about home renovation and just, I call it life skills, I guess. But thanks for watching, and I hope this helps with your home renovations.